Hi, I'm Selena from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with Michael Ventrella, who is he's a writer of fiction and nonfiction, and he's also an editor. And Michael, could you please tell everyone what it is that you write, or what it is that you do, really? I mean,
Uh,
you do
well,
everything.
no, I do what interests me. I've written five novels so far. They're all fun, adventure, not to be taken too seriously, lots of humor in them, but not comedy novels. They're if they're in the Marvel universe, they'd be Guardians of the Galaxy. That's what I tell people. So that way you get the idea of the kind of feel that I like to write. But I also edit anthologies, and the anthologies are the ones that sell better because I have big name authors in there, obviously. Like Baker Street Irregulars, you can see the poster behind me, was an anthology of Sherlock Holmes alternate stories that I edited with New York Times bestseller author Jonathan Mayberry. I have to use the New York Times part because he gets upset if I don't say that. Just kidding, Jonathan. Um, but I also have written some nonfiction books. I've written a couple of books about, believe it or not, the Monkees, which is music I loved when I was growing up. And then I wrote a book about the Beatles, about their music. And because I'm a lawyer, I wrote a book about the Constitution, the United States Constitution, sort of a humorous primary introduction if you want to learn about the Constitution and have a nice short little book to read it. That's what it is. So those are the three things basically I've done as far as writing.
Aha, okay. So, what is your latest book?
Well, the latest book is the Beatles one. I'm not sure if I want to talk about that one necessarily because I like talking about my fiction. But the Beatles book is called The Beatles on the Charts. It's from McFarlane Press. And what I did was I went through, I always loved the Billboard charts. So I went through the charts and so if you go this, you can look up every single album and single by any of the Beatles and their solo career that made the charts and read up on it. And I go into detail and we count them down from the most successful, to the least successful to the most successful. So if you're into that sort of thing, that's the kind of book you want to read. If you're into only fiction, yeah, forget that. But that's the most
Okay,
recent.
if you're
Uh,
into fiction,
my
what?
most recent novel is this one, Big Stick. This is an adventure with Teddy Roosevelt. And basically, I wrote a steampunk story where it's when Teddy Roosevelt was the commissioner of police of New York City. So it's before he became president. And he gets involved with this huge conspiracy. He's not the main character. The main character is this woman here. A black woman in 1898 cannot get a lot of things done, unfortunately, because of the way the world is. So on one hand, it's a fun adventure with lots of, steampunky type of things. But on the other hand, I wanted to address the discrimination that people felt and how they could deal with it. And she also, the interesting thing about her is she's also, because of that, she can do things that they wouldn't expect. She puts on a maid's costume and walks around and no one pays any attention to her and she can spy real easily, things like that. So she's got her little gadgets and things, and she belongs to a secret organization, but you'll find out more if you read it. Along the way, they get to meet Mark Twain and they work with him and they meet Harriet Tubman, who's very old and she's riding around in a steam-powered wheelchair. But there's all kind of interesting people. Whenever I needed someone in the book, I tried to find a real person, if at all possible, to make the story a lot more interesting. So that was a lot of fun doing the research. I got the cover is by Phil Foglio, who does the comic strip A Girl Genius. I'm a huge fan of him, and I was so honored. I sent him the book. He loved it, and he said, "I want to do this scene for the cover." And who am I to tell Phil Foglio no? So,
Okay. Now, can you explain a little bit about steampunk?
sure, steampunk is like the idea of um, Jules Verne and those kind of novels that came out at the turn of the last century, where people were so enthusiastic about science. Science was going to solve everything. Science was like magic to them. And so the optimism of science being able to solve things is always fun. And there's zeppelins and there's ray guns and all kind of those kind of things that just make it so this is what the future is going to hold. And obviously it didn't, but that's part of the fun of steampunk is imagining a world where magic can solve anything. I'm certain to say magic science can solve anything, but it's like magic. It really is. I mean, I don't explain half of the things in the book because in steampunk you don't have to. I've got this new device I've created. What does it do? Well, it does this, is this. How does it work? Science. You don't have to explain it. That's a good part about steampunk. unlike hard science fiction novels.
Aha.
So
Okay.
it's not,
So what was
it's kind of a fantasy, let's put it that way. Mhm.
okay. So what was the inspiration for Stick?
Because I have always admired Teddy Roosevelt and I like reading steampunk. And I thought, what if I put the two of them together? Because he's such a wonderful character. Because Teddy, I can put Teddy in a steampunk adventure. And these are the kind of adventures where the hero comes in and saves the day and the bad guys are twirling their mustaches. It's that kind of cliche in a sense, but you can have fun with it. And Teddy is the kind of guy who would run into danger and do all these crazy things that any other character you go, oh, that's so above the top. But with Teddy Roosevelt, you go, yeah, that's exactly what Teddy Roosevelt would do. And so that's what I had so much fun with it. I read a couple of his biographies to prepare, worked some of that stuff into the book, and he's just a wonderful character. And that's why. And of course, when he meets Mark Twain, it's even better because neither of them will listen to each other, and neither of them will shut up. And they both have these egos that clash against each other. So I really enjoyed writing those scenes.
So how much research did you have to do?
Well, this one required a little bit more because I was trying to get as many people as possible who were real. In other words, if I needed a character who had um, fought in the Civil War against the South, I did research to find somebody who actually did that so I could use a real person. The advantage of that, of course, is that I didn't have to create a character. The character was already there, but I had to do the research for it. But I think that makes the book a lot more fun and more interesting. And if you read it, and you know anything about American history, you hopefully will recognize some of the names in there. And of course, in the back, I tell you who they are, and we have pictures of them and everything else too. So that way you can say, oh, that person is actually real.
So what is your favorite research story that you've ever done in any of your books?
Oh gosh. Hmm. I guess I had a story that was just published in an anthology called The Four Question Marks of the Apocalypse. And that is edited by Keith DeCandido. And I got a story in there, and the idea is to take the four horsemen and do something weird with them. So I made them lawyers, the four lawyers of the apocalypse. And my story is called Horsemen, 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 and Horsemen Attorneys at Law. And basically, I had to research. I am not a religious person. I had to research about the Bible. I called a friend who was a preacher. I got that research, and that helped me fill out the story because I needed to find out exactly what does it say in the Bible about these guys? What are they supposed to do? And how can I find the loopholes? Because I'm writing about lawyers. So that was interesting and fun. I guess I'm remembering that one because it's the most recent story. It just came out like a couple of months ago. So
Aha. Okay. So what is the biggest challenge that you had in writing and putting out Stick?
The biggest challenge is finding the time to do it because I have a job and I have a disabled wife I help take care of, and finding the time to write is the thing that stands in my way. I mean, it's been a couple of years since Big Stick came out, and I've got the second sequel a third of the way done, and I just got to find the time to do it. And that's the problem. The advantage of doing the anthologies and the nonfiction books is they're easier to write and put together, so I can still have a book come out every year, even if it's not fiction. But I think that's the hardest part. And of course, the other hard part is trying to find a publisher who's interested or an agent. The market is just, there are so many writers out there now that it's very hard to break in. And the big publishing houses are being very, very conservative with who they want to hire. So none of my books are self-published. They're all with small publishing houses. But finding the right ones is always difficult.
Hmm. Now you mentioned anthologies, and you're an editor as well.
Mhm.
So can you tell me a little bit about the books that you've been editing and how you've been editing?
Sure. Well, this is one of the more recent ones. It's called Three Time Travelers Walk Into. I got the idea for this when I saw an ad for classes. You can take classes to learn about history. And they had like, Jesus, Teddy Roosevelt, and George Washington in the ad. And I went, wow, wouldn't it be great to get those three together and have an adventure? And so what I did was I said, let's put an anthology out. And the first thing I have to do, of course, is get a publisher willing to do it. And Fantastic Books said, yes, let's do that. So we contacted some big names and said, would you like to be in the book? And they said yes. And the big names help sell the book, of course. Once that
Mhm.
happens, we announced, hey, we got a new book coming out. Send me your stories. And then I get hundreds of stories, some of them from brand new authors who have never been published before, some of them from other famous, authors who think this is a great idea. And I have to wade through them and pick the best ones. But editing is more than just picking the best ones. I mean, obviously personal tastes come into play. A different editor might pick completely different stories, but you also have to make sure they work together. You know, editing an anthology is like making a mixtape. You know, when you used to make cassette tapes and you mix the songs, you don't want to have two fast songs in a row. You want to make sure the slow songs are mixed. You don't want to have the same theme more than once. And so sometimes I have to reject stories that are really, really good just because I don't have space for them, or they don't fit with the other stories, you know, or else they repeat something. For instance, I wanted to make sure that we didn't use the same people over and over again. You know, I got like 5 stories with Albert Einstein in them. I can only use one. I'm not going to pick 5 stories with the same character if, you know, if I don't have to. So that's what editing is about. With the Baker Street Anthologies book, you know, it was the same sort of thing. What if Sherlock Holmes was an alien? What if Sherlock Holmes was born in, you know, 500 years ago? And basically Sherlock Holmes' personality in different bodies. And I spread the word. I got a lot of big name authors who said, I want to do that. And then it was just a matter of wading through it all. But the good news is I like reading stories, so that's good. It's fun, you know. And sometimes you find something. One of the fun things is finding a brand new author who's never been published before, whose story is good enough to publish, which should be a good word for any of you out there who are writers. If it's good enough, we're not going to care that you've never been published before. You know, all that matters is quality.
And how do you get these stories? I mean, do you advertise for them or
Yes. Yeah.
like,
Basically, there's different places online where you can post saying, "Look, we have an anthology. We're looking for stories." I posted on my Facebook page, of course. I spread it out to other writers groups on Facebook and other places like that. We announce it on Twitter, and basically, there are web pages you can go to that list. Here's a magazine looking for these kind of stories. Here's a new anthology looking for this, and there are places to find that sort of thing. And that's what we do. We advertise there.
and what would one of these web pages be?
Oh, well, I used to use Rowan, Ralan, and he decided to stop doing it about, I don't know, 6 months ago. So that was the
Uh,
main thing I went to. But right now, I think I get more success on Facebook. If you just go on to different Facebook writers groups, if you find writers groups and open calls, you know, here's a call for, we're looking for stories of this kind. It's not hard to find. You just got to do a little bit of research.
and do you have to have an agent generally, or
Well,
uh,
I've had an agent for some of my books, but not all of them. No, Baker Street had an agent, and one of my novels had an agent, but it didn't get into the really, really big houses, unfortunately. It helped me get in bigger than I wanted, than I probably would have gotten by myself. But no, nowadays you don't really have to have an agent, uh, unless you're trying to break into the big time, and that's very hard to do.
okay. So, what else can we expect from you in the near future?
Well, I expect to keep writing short stories. I'm going to keep putting out, you know, more anthologies. Right now, it's a kind of a break period. Uh, the last anthology came out for a while ago, and I got to get back to work on it. um, and I got to finish this sequel to the steampunk book, you know, because people keep asking for it. You know, I got some good reviews and did really well. But like I said, I got sidetracked in other projects, you know, nonfiction books and things like that. One of the projects I did recently, which I really had fun with, is The Eye of Argon. Now, are you familiar with The Eye of Argon?
Yes.
Okay, The Eye of Argon is a story, just for those who are watching who don't know, written by this kid back in the 1970s, and it was really one of the worst, like Conan type stories you've ever read. But you know, he was 16 years old and he was writing it on a mimeograph machine. If you make a mistake, you can't go back and fix it. You know, it's not like he was writing it on a computer. But part of the fun is you can read it and try to not laugh. And so we at conventions we try to read it and not laugh. So with this book, I got, you know, we put it together. And what we did is we put the actual story in here along with corrections so you could see what it's supposed to say. But then I got a bunch of friends and writers to write sequels to it. So there are sequel stories that are just as much fun and just as silly as the original story. And it's gotten some good reviews, you know, people really like it. So that was a fun project because we were just in a sense honoring that story by writing sequels to it. And I put a story in there as well.
It's
And
great.
one of these days, you know, I have a fantasy series It's like a young adult fantasy series, Terran Osler and the blank, blank, blank. This one is Arch Enemies. You can see there's an arch right there. See, it's a young adult fantasy series that I've got 4 novels with and a collection of short stories. I'd love to write more in that series, but I'll be bluntly honest, they don't sell as well as I'd like. I need to write that breakthrough novel, you know. This one is called The Axes of Evil. That's another sequel. I like having puns in my title, obviously, so you can tell that they're not taken too seriously.
Okay.
But the concept behind those books is the first book is that, you know, those fantasy stories where there's somebody who is you're the chosen one. They grab some kid and say, you're the chosen one, you know, like Harry Potter or something. You're going to save us according to the prophecy. Well, that happens in this book, and they grab him and they say, you're the chosen one. You've got to save us. But they got the wrong guy. It's not him. But everyone thinks it's him, and all the bad guys are trying to kill him. So the prophecy doesn't come true, and other people are trying to stop him. And he's got to somehow resolve the prophecy and solve the day so they will stop hunting him down. And he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know how to cast magic. He doesn't know how to fight. He's just this kid. And so part of the fun and the humor in it is having him go, what am I supposed to do? And having everyone be confused about him and thinking he's a hero when he's really not. But it has a happy ending. He does figure out what to do by being clever, you know, and if you read it, you'll see.
That sounds like a fun story.
Oh, I had fun. Mhm.
And it's funny when you were talking about Teddy Roosevelt, I immediately thought of Night at the Museum. I was
Oh, with
like,
Robin Williams playing that character, yeah. Well, Ted, that's
yeah.
what's so great about Teddy. He is like, you know, the most interesting. He might not be the best president we ever had, but he certainly is the most interesting, you know. And I
Yes.
just love reading about him and hearing the stories. And you keep hearing these things that you would go, "That's outrageous," and it's all true. He really did these things, you know. And he's also he was a good guy. He tried to do some really good things for our country, and I admire him for that.
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay, so now I have questions for you about being a writer slash editor.
Okay.
Okay. What is your favorite part about being a writer on the whole writing and publishing process?
Uh, I don't necessarily like writing. I like having written. I like having a story done and having people read it and enjoy it, you know, and tell me that they really enjoyed the characters and had fun with the book. To me, that's the goal is having people enjoy it. Um, so to me, that's the greatest pleasure is finishing it and having other people read it and enjoy it.
Okay. What about editing? What's your favorite part about editing?
About editing, it's that I get to work with all these authors that I've been reading since I was a kid, and now suddenly they're coming to me and I have to edit them. You know, I had David Gerald's been in a couple of my anthologies, and if you don't know who David Gerald is, he's a multiple award-winning writer who got his start writing for Star Trek, the original series, with his episode The Trouble with Tribbles. He's won Hugo Awards and Nebula Awards and all kind of stuff, and I've been reading his stuff since I was a kid. And suddenly here I am editing him, you know, and he's writing stories for me. And I wrote back to him with one and I said, well, I like this story, but I think you should change this, this, and this. And I'm going, what am I doing telling David Gerald what to do? And he was like, oh, good idea. You know, and I'm learning that even the most professional authors want feedback. They want to hear what people think. You know, they don't necessarily have to agree with me, but they do want the feedback. And so the fact that I'm getting to work with all these wonderful authors that I've always loved is what's amazing to me, you know, and I still geek out over the fact that I've got some of these people in my books that I've always loved to read. So to me, that's the greatest part. You know, I'm fanning out on it. So yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit more about what an editor does aside from just selecting the stories?
Well, there's different editors, of course. There's the content editor who will take your story and read it and tell you how to fix it, you know, and say, oh, this needs to be done, or you're not consistent here, that kind of stuff. Then there's, of course, the proofreading editor. Let's not worry about that. You know, that's more of a detail-oriented thing. And then there's the editors like what I do, which is look for good stories and make suggestions. I've read stories and I said, listen, this is a good story. I will accept your story if you change this, this, and this, you know, and I'll work with the author to make sure that's the best story I possibly can, because I want the book to be the best book it possibly could be. Sometimes it works, sometimes the authors argue with me, and sometimes they say, well, then I'm not going to buy your story. And sometimes it's just a matter of, look, this is not working well. I think you need to cut it by 1,000 words. It's just way too long. And it's, I think if you tighten it up, it'll be a lot better. Those kind of comments that you work with people on. So a lot of it is not just which stories do I like, but how can I make the stories that I like the best possible stories they could be, and most of that comes from, I don't know how to teach that. That's something you get from reading a lot and paying attention, and once you start writing, you really start noticing things that you wouldn't have noticed otherwise. To give you a better example, I'm also a musician. I've been in lots of bands over the years. And when I listen to music, I can hear things that my wife doesn't notice because I'm a musician. I notice how they mix things together and all that kind of stuff. She's an artist, so we go to a museum and she will see things in art that I don't notice. She will notice the techniques and how it's put together. And the more I write, the more I start noticing how other authors write. I start noticing the way they put things together. And I don't know how to teach that, but the more you read and the more you write, the more you'll learn how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I was just rambling a bit, but you understand what I'm trying to say. Yeah, it's and obviously you get better. I look back on stuff I wrote 20 years ago and I go, oh my gosh, you get better over time, hopefully, if you're doing it right.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully. So,
Nothing, you gotta, everything requires work. If you want to be good at anything, you got to practice, and you're going to start off sucking and then eventually you're going to get good, That's just
what do you consider the most challenging part of editing?
saying no to friends, saying no to people who I like the story, but I can't fit it. I mean,
Mm.
I've gotten my share of rejection letters too, of course. It comes with the job. If you're writing, sometimes you just can't say, you got to say no. I did a blog piece a while ago, explaining, look, if I reject your story, it might not be because the story was bad. It might be for all these different reasons. And I don't like sending rejection letters, but I have to. I can't accept every single story, obviously. Sometimes I don't like sending rejection letters. Some stories are so terrible I don't mind. And some people, oh my gosh, they just don't get it. I don't know how you tell them, it's not working, or you say, I want a story of 5,000 words, and some guy sent me a novel, it's like, no, I'm not going to take your novel. What do you think you're doing? Just frustrating things like that. I don't mind sending no's to.
Okay. So, what has been your favorite adventure during your publishing career?
I don't know if this will count, but I'll tell you this funny story. Um, I was at a convention with George R.R. Martin, who wrote the Game of Thrones series,
Mhm.
and his room was right down the hall from mine, and we kept ending up on the elevator together. And one time we were on the elevator, and some people got on and didn't know who he was and asked him to push the button for him, and he pushed the button, and they got off, and he said, if this writing thing hadn't worked out, maybe I would have been an elevator operator. And I turned to him and said, well, now I understand what HODOR stands for. It means hold the door. And I made that joke to him. And he looked at me and said, you don't know how close you are. And this was before the episode came on TV. So then the episode comes on TV, and the character named Hodor in the book stood for hold the door. And suddenly everyone thinks I'm this genius. My blog hits because I wrote about it on my blog, and this is like 2 years later, the show comes on, right? My blog hits go from this to way up here. I got interviewed by Time Magazine and all these magazines, and writing stories about how I had predicted the plot line. And so for like 3 days, I was like, that was my 15 minutes of fame, and everyone talked about it. And coincidentally, the very next weekend, I was at another convention with George R.R. Martin. And he came up to me and he gave me a Targaryen coin from the TV show. And he posed with a picture of him hitting me with a stick because he was mad at me. And I put that on my blog. So that's kind of cool that, George R. R. Martin, I got famous very shortly because I made a joke that happened to be true. If you go to my blog at michaelaventrella.com, you can do a search for, Hodor or Game of Thrones, and you can read the whole story. So that's my
Speaking,
most interesting adventure. I'll put it that way anyway.
it's great.
Hmm.
Speaking of your blog, I noticed that you have a lot of different tips for authors.
Yes.
And I can you tell us a little bit more about your
Sure. When I
blog?
started the blog, I thought, nobody wants to read. There's 9 billion blogs out there from writers. Nobody wants to read about what I had for lunch. So I said, you know what'll be good is I'm going to write a blog about what I'm learning as I'm publishing, how lessons I've learned along the way. And so I post about things that I've learned so for new writers to understand how to get by. And I also interview lots of writers and editors and agents and ask them questions geared towards new writers. So if you're a writer and you want to get ahead and learn how to be a better writer, go to my webpage and read the blog and just skim. You can do search for certain words and things. And there's lots of interviews on the side. You'll see a list of all the people I've been interviewed. There's also a section where I have now that I'm doing Zoom interviews, obviously you can watch the Zoom interviews with other authors. And we talk about advice for starting writers. And that way I can pay it forward. One of the other things I did is here in the Poconos of Pennsylvania, I started a group called the Pocono Liars Club. Now, the reason we started that is there's a group down in Philadelphia called the Philadelphia Liars Club, and I used to go to their meetings every now and then. And so I started my own chapter with their permission, of course. And that was Jonathan Mayberry's group before he left to go to California. So we have the Pocono Liars Club here in Poconos. And every year we have a free conference where people can come and learn about writing. And we also have a free workshop every year where we actually sit down and do projects and things together. And we don't charge anything. That's all paid forward. We don't even take dues. So it's just come and learn. Other writers helping out you. And I think that's important because certainly I have learned a lot from other writers. I used to go to Jonathan Mayberry's Liars Club down in Philadelphia just to learn for a while.
Hmm.
And I think that I wanted to do the same thing up here in the Poconos because that's
So
like two.
are there any other groups, clubs, or organizations that you'd recommend to other writers that might have helped you?
There are plenty, and you just got to find the local ones. You need to do a search. For example, down here in Pennsylvania, there's the Lehigh Valley Writers Group, which is very active, and they put on a convention every year, a good writers workshop. And I was one of the guest speakers last year, which was very fun. Doing our little PowerPoint presentation, and they're all over the place. You just got to do a search, and I'm sure up in the Boston area, there's got to be lots. Yep. I used to live in Boston, but I didn't really start writing until after I left. Well, let me put it that. I didn't start trying to write novels until after. I mean, obviously I've been writing all my life, it's just, I didn't try doing fiction until recently.
So, what is the greatest lesson that you've learned thus far in your publishing career?
Oh, that you can always get better, maybe, that no matter how good you think you are, you'll look back at your stuff 10, 15 years from now and go, oh, I'm not very good, am I? When I read a book, I get two different reactions usually. One, I read it and go, oh my gosh, I will never be this good. I don't know why I'm even trying. And the other reaction is, oh my God, how did this person get this book published? Oh, I'm so much better than this. There doesn't seem to be a middle ground anywhere. But the point is, there's always, as long as you don't ever read like the really good books and think I'm better than that, you're in good shape because you can always be better.
Okay. And do you have any other piece of advice that you'd want to share with other writers? I know you've got all that stuff on your blog, but is there any particular thing?
I think too many writers these days are finding it's too easy to get published. I know when I first tried to write stories, 25 years ago, I sent some stories off to the magazines and they were all rejected, and rightly so. They weren't good enough. They really weren't. I wasn't at the stage yet that they should have been published. But nowadays, what's happening is too many writers get their story done and then they self-publish it. And there's nothing wrong with self-publishing, but you have to realize you're going to be held to the same standard as non-self-published books. So if you're going to self-publish, you need to get an editor, you need to get a good cover, you need to get people to read it and give you comments. And if it's not good enough, don't put it out because your first book is going to ruin your reputation if it's a terrible book. And I've seen too many writers are so anxious to, oh, I've written a book, let's get it published. And you look at it and it's full of errors and it reads terribly and it needed editing. And I think the biggest mistake too many writers are they're too anxious. It's so easy to get published nowadays, unlike it was when I first started, that everyone's doing it. And some of that stuff should not be published. You should go look and find a small
Yeah.
publishing house, if nothing else. And if no small publishing house is interested in your book, that tells you something, right? If they don't want it, then maybe it's not good enough yet to be published, and keep rewriting, keep working on it. And I think that's the the biggest advice I can give new writers, because it's just you think your baby is the most beautiful baby in the world. You know, it's very hard to look at your own work objectively. And you think, I've written this masterpiece, and you put it out and you wonder why no one loves it. The other problem is when you self-publish it, no one's promoting it. You know, your publisher's not doing anything for you. You've got to go out and push it. And too many writers will put something out and they go, why isn't anybody selling it? You know, you've got to go to conventions, you've got to go to book shows, you got to do everything you can to promote it. You got to have a good web page, you got to do interviews like this. And too many writers are quiet, shy little people who don't want to do that kind of stuff. And that's not how anyone's going to know about your book, you know, just because it's good. I mean, there might be some great books out there you don't know about just because the people don't know how to promote it.
Very true. Excellent.
Mhm.
Okay, now I have questions about you as a person.
Okay.
What is one thing that most people don't realize about you?
Oh, I don't know if there's anything people don't realize about me, because if you go to my Facebook page, I talk about everything. I talk about politics and religion and, you know, and uh, my wife and law and art and everything. I'm not sure if I have any great secrets out there. So I don't know how to answer that really. You know, I'm
Okay, that's fair.
yeah, it's I'm not hiding anything. You know, a lot of writers think, oh, I better stay away from controversy. I don't want controversy because that might hurt me. I don't care. That's who I am, you know, and if you don't like it, you probably won't like my books either.
Okay, that's absolutely fair.
Mhm.
What one question do you wish interviewers would ask you, and what would your answer be?
Oh, I think they'd ask me what my favorite movie is, or what my favorite books are, what my favorite music is, you know, because I love to talk about that kind of stuff, you know. I mean, obviously I'm a Beatles fan because I wrote a book about the Beatles. But I,
And the
you know,
monkeys.
and the monkeys. Well, the monkeys, the interesting thing about the monkeys is this. When I was a kid, I watched the monkeys and I said, that's what I want to be when I grew up. I want to be in a band and have wacky adventures. And I taught myself to play music and I was in bands and stuff. And then as I got older, I found the Beatles and, oh, these guys are better than the monkeys. Hey, you know. So the monkeys aren't like I would not put the monkeys in my top 20 best favorite bands, but there was an opening for a book about them, and I was still interested. You know, like so we wrote this book because no one had written this kind of book about the monkeys before, and you know, it was fun putting it together. So it's not like I'm a fanatic. And trust me, when I go to conventions and I meet monkeys people, some of them tear into me because they don't like my books. Because we, you know, sometimes some of those monkey songs really suck, and we say that in the book, you know, and they don't necessarily like that part. So there's two books. The first book is we go through all the music, we go through every single song they ever recorded and talk about it. The second book is a biography, which talks about what happened after the show went off the air. And it's co-written with Mark Arnold, who does lots of uh, media type books.
Okay. But what is or are your passions when you're not writing? And how do you make time to do all of these things?
Well, that's the problem. You know, I'm a lawyer. That takes a lot of time, you know, and I wish I had more time to write. So my passions would be music, you know, listening to new bands and listening to music, of course. My other passion is my wife, taking care of her. We've been married 41 years now.
Wow.
She's a great artist. Her name is Heidi Hooper, HeidiHooper.com. Check out her art. Um, and other than that, I like playing computer games as a way to relax. And I wish we could afford to travel more, but like I said, because of her disability, that limits what we can do. I like going to conventions though. That's a lot of fun. We go to science fiction conventions and where I can talk about the books and she shows her art at the conventions and we have lots of friends there. So, and sometimes we invite them over and play games all night. You know, not computer games, but you know, board games and things.
That's great. So
So,
what
you
is
know,
your
politics, obviously politics. I am involved in the local Democratic Party and you know, and do that kind of stuff. Sorry.
no, that's great. So what does your writing space look like? And what do you need to have around you when you're writing or editing?
Well, this is it. It's like we're sort of up in the attic right now of my house. And this is where I write right here. And you can see there's a cat tree behind me. So sometimes there's a cat sitting next to me that keeps me company. Uh, I need it quiet. I don't, I know some people like to write with music in the background, but I don't. I like it really silent. Um, and just sometimes, sometimes it's work. You got to say, the problem with writing is it's not like you can't wait for inspiration. You got to say, no, I'm going to sit down and write for an hour. And you just got to force yourself to sit down and write something. And even if it's crap, it's something, and first drafts are always crap anyway. But you got to get something down on the paper. And I've certainly written things and then, 2 days later, delete the entire thing I wrote because it just doesn't fit. But you don't know until you put it together. And writing is not a linear subject either. Sometimes I write the ending before I get to before the middle. You know what I mean? I want to
Yeah.
know where I'm going to go, and then I reach for it. You don't have to write it in order. No one has to. As I tell people, there are no rules for writing except don't be boring. As long as the final story comes out good, that's all that matters. And how you get there doesn't really matter.
I
So,
love that. That is a great saying.
well, yeah, too many writers think I got to start on page. They'll start on page one and they'll write, and then they'll go back and they'll touch it up and they'll touch it up and they'll touch it up, and they never finish it. But no, you got to get that first draft out. That's the hardest part, really. Getting that first draft finished is the hardest part. And then you can go back and edit it. And to me, that's the reward. I like editing. I like going back and rewriting and adding foreshadowing and helping to create the character's background a little bit better and fixing all the dialogue problems. The first draft, you just rush through it to get it done. And that's the hardest part. So many writers never get finished with that first draft. And, I'm not necessarily a better writer than other people, but I get it done. If you never finish it, how do you know if they're a good writer?
Do you have to have any type of food or drink while you're writing or editing?
I don't have to, but I have my juice next to me, and I like to munch on sunflower seeds. That's
Sounds good to me.
yep.
And writers, you just mentioned that you have a cat. Now, does your cat help you or hinder you with your work?
I have 4 cats. Um,
Oh,
and they sometimes hinder me because they'll come in and demand, they'll rub against my legs and like, it's time to feed me, damn it. You know. But other than
oh
that,
yeah.
my cats are they're very loving, and they make us happy. They sleep with us on the bed, and are the nicest cats you've ever had. We're very happy with our cats. We have Mrs. Premise and Mrs. Conclusion, which were named after a Monty Python skit. And then we have Doctor Who and River Song. So yes, we have nerdy cats.
Yes, cats definitely will keep you company and
Yeah, but some usually, when I'm writing and I need a break, I pet the cat that's on the tree behind me half the time. Right now, she's in a box right there on the floor because I put a box on the floor. And once you put a box on the floor, that's the best way to catch a cat.
Mhm, absolutely.
Mhm.
Okay, I just have two more questions for you.
Okay.
Um, where can people find your work aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester? And I
Mhm.
always put it in a plug for Annie's. And you can get Michael's work at Annie's if you call us at 508-796-5613, or you can email us at orders@anniesbooksworcester.com, and we can get Michael's books for you.
Mhm.
Or where else can people find your books?
Oh, anywhere. Obviously, if you go to my webpage, there are links to get to the books. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, any place you can think of. You just go to any bookstore and say, I'd like to order. If they don't have it in stock, just tell them, can you order this for me? Because they're all available anywhere you want to get them. They're all general availability. Uh, if you go to my webpage, you can also, on most of them, you can read the first chapter or so to get an idea. Some of them I actually read the chapter if you want to listen to me reading it. But that's a good way to get an idea of what the writing is like. And if you like the first chapter, hopefully that'll make you go out and get the rest of the book.
Oh, excellent.
Mhm.
Okay. And my last question is, how can we follow your work and share your awesomeness?
Well, that's once more. You can come on my Facebook page. I will have you join my Facebook page as long as you're not some troll. Um, but you can follow me there. You don't even have to, be a friend because I post everything there. And of course, my webpage. If you go to michaelaventrella.com, that's the webpage where you can read up on what I'm doing, see my interviews. I'm going to be interviewing David Mack this week, who is
Hmm.
putting out a new book, a Star Trek novel, comes out next week, and we're going to be talking about that. But also, like I said, if you go to that webpage, you can see my interviews with other people on Zoom as well. You know, we record those. So that's the best thing. Just as long as you remember Michael A. Ventrella, you're doing fine. Now, let me give you one bit of a warning. If you do a search for Michael Ventrella, there is one problem.
Yeah.
Years ago, you know this, huh? Years ago, there was a TV show called The World's Biggest Loser, where they, somebody who'd be overweight would try to lose weight. And the winner was Michael Ventrella. It's not me. So if you see Michael Ventrella, World's Biggest Loser, that's not me. I'm not the world's biggest loser. So
I did
look for the
question
Michael
that.
Ventrella author instead. Yes.
I did question that, and I said, no, it's not.
Yeah.
It's
It
not
wasn't
you.
me. It's not me. No. So if you see Michael A. Ventrella, Biggest Loser, it's Michael Ventrella, different middle initial.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. It was great talking to you.
Well, thank you.
And again, if you ever do get to the Worcester area, we'd love to have you at our store.
Well, I do miss Massachusetts a bit, but not the weather.
Michael, thank you very much.